It's strange to look back on those days when everything seemed perfect. Our first meetings with Mark were filled with laughter, tenderness, and dreams. We met by chance at one of the university lectures, and from the first glance, I knew he was different from the others. His eyes always sparkled with intelligence and kindness, and his smile made my heart beat faster. We were young, full of plans and ambitions. Mark was everything I could have dreamed of: attentive, smart, honest. He knew how to listen and talk, wasn't afraid to express his feelings, and always supported me in my endeavors. The wedding was like a fairy tale. A white dress, flowers everywhere, friends and family who were happy for us. Mark seemed like the happiest person in the world when he stood next to me at the altar. We made vows that, at the time, I thought would never be broken. That day, the world revolved around us, and it seemed like nothing could ever disrupt our happiness. After the wedding, our life was filled with joy and laughter. Mark settled us into a cozy home, where every detail was thought out. On weekends, he would organize family picnics where we played frisbee and flew kites. Every evening, we would sit in the living room, cuddle, and share our thoughts and feelings. Mark often said how happy he was to have found me and that he couldn't imagine his life without our family. I felt the most loved and protected in the world. At that moment, I was sure that fate was kind to us and that we could overcome any difficulties together. However, as is often the case, a storm followed the calm. Small disagreements began to grow, becoming more serious. Mark started staying late at work more often, and when he came home, it seemed like everything irritated him, from minor clutter in the house to how I spent my time. The first warning signs made me think, but I still believed that we would find a way to bring our fairy tale back. I never imagined how soon everything would change. It all started with one of the most humiliating incidents that happened during a family dinner we hosted at home with friends. Such evenings had always been an opportunity for us to relax and enjoy the company of loved ones. But that evening is remembered for different reasons. When it was time for dessert, the conversation at the table unexpectedly turned personal, and Mark, already quite drunk, started joking loudly. The jokes became more and more explicit, and at some point, he turned to me with a sarcastic smirk, saying, "My Eliza is also a bit of a shapeshifter. At night, she turns into a log." After these words, everyone fell silent, and there was a deafening laugh from Mark at his own joke. The air in the room became charged with tension. I felt all eyes on me. Some of our friends tried to steer the conversation in a different direction, but it was too late. I was overwhelmed with shame, my heart pounded in my chest, and my eyes filled with tears. I tried to smile to smooth over the moment, but inside, I was crushed by the pain. Mark continued to have a good time, either unaware of my state or simply ignoring it. It hurt me so deeply that I couldn't sleep all night, replaying everything that had happened in my mind. I began to wonder where we were headed and how I could live with someone who didn't see or value my pain. As my relationship with Mark became more strained and cold, my life suddenly got even more complicated. My father, my dear dad, got sick. It was cancer, and the diagnosis hit like a bolt from the blue. He had always been a strong and energetic man, and seeing him so weak and vulnerable was unbearable. At first, Mark seemed supportive. He accompanied me to doctor's appointments and helped take care of my dad on his worst days. But soon, his patience started to wear thin. He increasingly expressed dissatisfaction with the time I spent with my father, forgetting how he once needed support. "You can't spend your whole life in the hospital," he would say when I got home late at night. But how could I do otherwise? This was my father, who had always been there for me when I needed him. However, Mark couldn't or wouldn't understand that. His words became harsher, and the accusations more frequent. The situation worsened when Mark began to claim that I was betraying him, choosing a dying old man over my family. These words struck me to my core. "How can you say that?" I would ask, but he just brushed it off, saying I was out of touch with reality. Day by day, the tension grew. Mark often lashed out over small things, yelling at me if I missed his calls or messages, accusing me of completely distancing myself from the family. One day, when I came home, he, in a fit of rage, threw my favorite vase, a birthday gift from my dad, out the window. My guilt towards Mark intensified with each passing day, and I tried to find a balance between taking care of my father and wanting to keep our family together. But the more I tried to hold everything together, the more it all fell apart. I felt torn between two worlds, each waiting for me with disappointment and pain. That evening became the climax of our marriage. Mark hadn't spoken to me for several days, communicating only through sharp and sarcastic remarks. I was coming home from the hospital, where I had spent almost the entire day beside my father, who had undergone a complicated surgery. My thoughts were with him, and I wasn't prepared for what awaited me at home. As soon as I opened the door, Mark was standing in the hallway, his eyes burning with anger. "Where have you been for so long?" His voice was icy and sharp as a blade. I began to explain, but he interrupted me. "You always find time for your father, but what about your family, Eliza? Where am I in your life?" I tried to defend myself, to say that I loved him, but Mark didn't listen. His words cut me, each one deepening the already existing wounds in my heart. "You chose him, not us. You're a traitor, Eliza." Then I saw my things in his hands, packed in a box. "What's this?" I asked, feeling the world starting to fall apart. "I'm leaving," he said without a trace of regret in his voice. "You've destroyed our family." He threw the box on the floor, and the contents scattered across the hallway. I stood motionless, paralyzed, watching everything we had built over the years come crashing down. Mark began yelling, accusing me of all the mortal sins, his voice filling every corner of our home. I tried to calm him down, but he was unstoppable. "You're stupid, you'll never see me again," he shouted, heading for the door. Those words struck me like an electric shock. I screamed, rushed to him, trying to stop him, but he pushed me away. I fell to the floor, and the last thing I saw was the door slamming behind him with a loud bang. That evening, I spent on the hallway floor, clutching my belongings, crying, and whispering to the broken photos and memories. The life I knew was over. I was shattered, humiliated, and abandoned. My tears mingled with a feeling of utter loneliness and despair. The months after Mark left were like an endless nightmare. Every morning, I woke up with a heaviness in my chest, hoping that everything that had happened was just a bad dream. But the emptiness on his side of the bed and the scattered belongings around the house reminded me of the harsh reality. My days turned into an endless sequence of loneliness and despair, each hour a reminder of lost love and broken dreams. My financial situation quickly deteriorated. Without Mark's support, bills started to pile up, and my savings dwindled before my eyes. I was forced to sell the new TV and some furniture to pay the bills and buy food. Every day, I looked for ways to save, denying myself any small desires. My life turned into a constant struggle with loneliness and depression. I avoided meeting friends because I couldn't hold back tears when talking about my life. Every evening, I sat in the dark living room, hugging a pillow that still smelled like Mark. I talked to it as if it were him, asking why he left us, why it all ended this way. One evening, while looking through old family photos, I found a letter from Mark that he had written to me on our first wedding anniversary. Reading his words about eternal love and devotion, I couldn't understand how the same person could betray me so cruelly. Tears fell on the pages, smudging the ink, and at that moment, I realized that the past was gone and wouldn't return. All that was left was the pain and memories of what once was happiness. That night became a point of no return for me. After 4 months of unspeakable suffering and agonizing loneliness, life suddenly took an unexpected turn. It happened on a day that started like any other. But then my father's lawyer called. He invited me to his office to discuss matters of the will. I felt empty but gathered my strength and went. In his office, surrounded by books and folders, he gave me news that changed everything in an instant. My father had left me his entire estate. I couldn't believe my ears. "Your father was extremely prudent with his finances," the lawyer said. "He wanted to ensure that you and your children would be taken care of. It turned out that my father had saved his personal earnings for me his entire life. The amount was about $1 million. I never imagined my father had such money. At first, I felt paralyzed. Tears of joy and sorrow mixed in my eyes. It was hard to grasp that my life could change so dramatically. But as I drove home, my heart, long sunk in despair, began to feel a surge of strength and new hope. I no longer had to worry about paying bills and clearing debts. But my joy was short-lived. One morning, when I stepped outside to breathe the crisp autumn air, I saw him. Mark was standing at my gate. His eyes were full of tears, and his hands were trembling. He dropped to his knees, looking up at me with a pleading expression, as if begging for mercy. His words flowed one after another like a river of promises and pleas. I've changed, I swear, I'm not the person I was. I'm begging you, give me a chance to show you I've become different. Mark crawled forward on his knees, getting closer to me, his hands reaching out as if trying to physically grasp my forgiveness. His eyes radiated desperation, and there was something repulsive and overwhelmingly pathetic about it. Looking at him, this man who was once my world, now just a pathetic, greedy, soulless being, I just wanted to be alone. I wanted him to disappear from my life once and for all. Over time, Mark tried to contact me through mutual friends and wrote letters expressing his remorse and desire to make amends. Ugh! It made me sick.